Mommy, help me.
What's wrong, darling? Are you hurt? Daddy's not here. Are you in the house alone? When I returned from a week-long business trip, I found my daughter in a room, lying on her side in an unnatural fashion. She seemed to be sleeping, but something seemed off, so I called her name. She immediately woke up, started to cry, and full-on tackled me to the floor with the tightest hug. I immediately felt something was definitely wrong with her body, so she felt light, and her arms looked unhealthily thin.
Daddy won't give me any food.
Eventually, my husband came home, but he was drunk out of his skull, and he had a woman there with him, presumably someone who he'd been having an affair with. My anger reached its peak, but the next moment, my husband was out cold. This is the story of how a tragic turn of events in parenting and self-control presented very serious consequences on my daughter, and how these actions on the part of my husband were met with fair justice. Hopefully, this will teach us that along with the strict parenting comes a form of deep, passionate love from the children receiving the parenting, and how it's often very important to try to see the true meaning behind every action of any person. My name is Gianna Kingman. I am a 34-year-old local government employee working for the City Hall. My husband Maverick is the same age as me and works for a company owned by his parents. We have a daughter, Emery, who was 6 years old when this story started and had just started attending elementary school as a first-grade student. We lived in a rather rural area, and she went to school with her childhood friends and enjoyed her days there very much. I mentioned I worked at a city hall, but more specifically, I work in a community revitalization, and I'm pretty busy on the weekends with local events and seasonal city activities. Maverick works for his father, Mr. Raphael Kingman, a prominent local figure who was very strict when it comes to parenting his children and did not tolerate any leniency, even for his son. That's why Maverick never takes himself for being the heir to inherit the business lightly, and was working very hard to keep his performance up to be worthy of inheriting everything in his father's eyes. Maverick's mother, Kendra, had a gentle, ladylike demeanor that was rather prominent in her day-to-day life, but she wasn't particularly willing to spoil her son, and was also strict about manners. She is frugal at heart, and her hobbies include enjoying cooking vegetables harvested from her vegetable garden and preserving them for meals during the winter. Since he was a child, Maverick had received a strict upbringing from his mother, who taught him not to be stingy with food and not to be picky about what he liked and disliked. And for some reason, I still fail to comprehend to this day, and my in-laws took an immediate liking to me and considered me the perfect candidate to be their son's wife. The Kingmans claimed they thought I was ideal because of my hard job at the town office, but there was another thing that I thought was intriguing. The fact that I took karate lessons. I still take them to this day, and it all started when I was in college, living alone outside of my hometown. I heard some disturbing stories about snatch and grab and robberies from my friends around me, so I decided to learn some self-defense skills. I had always enjoyed physical exercise and was going to a fitness gym during my years in college, and the same place offered karate classes, so I started taking them. They were very engaging and made quite a few friends of all ages and genders along the way, and I continued until I graduated. After I started working at the city office, I went to the local community center once a week to help an elderly sensei who was teaching karate to small children. The sensei was quite old, so my role was to take care of the children who were still in kindergarten. I was also promised an hour of practice a week by the sensei after work. When I went to visit the Kingman family after I started dating Maverick, I told them I was doing karate because I had no major hobbies, and Kendra said, "I see you are a martial arts disciple. You have such a nice posture." "Oh, Mrs. Kingman, you're too kind. I beg to differ, though. I hear that you make time to train despite your demanding job at the city hall. Our son must be the luckiest man in the world to have landed such a distinguished, fine young woman like yourself." Thanks to my hobby of learning karate, Mrs. Kingman approved of me very enthusiastically, And after the wedding with the Kingmans keeping a kind, watchful over things, my married life with Maverick was going well. It was the start of the year, and I was preparing to go out of the town for a week to train for a new sort of community activity that was going to be implemented this year. Maverick was pretty busy with work around then, and often came home late, so I was worried about whether I could leave Emery with him, so I went to talk over with him. Hey, are you sure you're gonna take good care of Emery while I'm gone?
Don't worry. I explained the situation to Dad and people at work, so I'll be working shorter hours.
She's just starting school, and I know I might sound a little paranoid, but I can't help but be a bit worried about her health. Her appetite is a little low, apparently.
Is that so?
Her teacher wrote in a little booklet that she tends to leave a little left over during lunch at school.
It's kind of unimpressive on Emery's part.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see until she gets used to it. She probably gets pretty nervous about starting school with people she doesn't know, as we all were at one point. Even during my business trip, I called Maverick every day. And every time I inquired after Emery's condition, he said he didn't notice anything unusual. However, something was definitely fishy after some time. The most significant thing that I noticed was that for the first 2 days, he let her talk to me on the phone, and her bright voice was telling me about her day at school, reassured me that she was doing all right. But from the 3rd day onward, I didn't hear her voice because Maverick either told me that she was in bed early or that she was doing homework. His reports on her condition also became pretty simple and nonchalant, like he wasn't taking the matter very seriously. I got pretty worried and told him, "I'm worried about how things are going at home, honey. Could you be more specific as to how Emery's doing? Are you sure there's nothing wrong with her?"
It's fine. It's fine. I swear it's fine, Gianna. Everything's great.
I felt slightly suspicious as to why his voice sounded so cheerful. Hey, you're not drunk, are you?"
Oh, no. Of course not. I did have a few beers, but I swear I'm sober.
Alright, then I believe you. Just make sure Emery eats breakfast tomorrow morning, and send her off on time so she won't be late, okay?
Ma'am, yes ma'am.
The call ended with that little exchange. On Friday, the last day of my training, I received a call from my daughter's homeroom teacher. She said that Emery had been acting strange for the last couple of days, and that she had barely touched her lunch at school. When I asked her for more detail, I started to panic as it became more and more apparent to me that Emery wasn't doing well at all. After thanking her teacher, I attempted to call him Maverick, but to no avail, and for some strange reason, he was incommunicado. I got even more worried and decided to rush to catch the last bullet train instead of returning home for the next day, as I was scheduled to do. I made it home by a few minutes before midnight, and when I entered the house, the lights were still on. I couldn't find Maverick anywhere, and when I entered my daughter's room, I found her huddled in her bed. I assumed that she was already asleep, but her sleeping posture was unusual. Her body seemed to be straining and spasming a little, and her breathing was very shallow and rapid. I wanted to let her sleep, it being late, but this was definitely extraordinary and potentially dangerous for her, so I gently called out her name. "Emery, darling, are you asleep?" At the sound of my voice, she immediately woke up, started to cry, and fell on tackling me to the floor with the tightest hug. As she clung to me, I immediately felt something was definitely wrong with her body. She felt so light, and her arms looked unhealthily thin. "What's wrong, darling? Are you hurt? Daddy's not here. Are you in the house alone?" I asked her impatiently, and she gave me a shocking answer that made me wonder if my ears were working properly.
Daddy won't give me any food.
I took her to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator to get something to eat for my poor, hungry, and emaciated Emery, but there was no food inside. There was quite literally only beer cans everywhere. I noticed the trash can out of the corner of my eye, and upon lifting the lid away from the container, my eyes opened wide. stunned by its contents. It was overflowing with liquor bottles and beer cans. I don't drink, so I don't know what exactly I was looking at, but there were several bottles of whiskey that certainly looked expensive. I wondered if this was all alcohol had been consumed by Maverick single-handedly. The amount was insane, enough that would definitely fill up an average kiddie swimming pool halfway. But upon closer inspection of the cans and bottles, I found traces of red lipstick on some of them. I felt goosebumps, sent an electrifying sensation all across my body. Could he have had a woman in his house, drinking with him, without even feeding my daughter, no less? Then I had heard the front door open. I heard the voice of Maverick and of that woman I didn't recognize.
Right here is positively perfect, m'lady.
Oh my god, you're so drunk, Maverick, darling. Take it easy. Your wife is coming home tomorrow, right? You better howl out before she does, alright? Don't want our little fling to get out in the open.
Yeehaw! Okay, Sheriff Cameron. I read you loud and clear. I love you, darling.
I love you too. Leaving now, okay? Don't let her find out, okay?
And at that instant, I appeared in front of them at the entrance and said, "I'm sorry, but she already knows."
Miss Gianna? This is not good. Maverick, this is none of my business. Goodbye.
I replied to the cowardly woman trying to escape in a low voice. "Running away, are we? Well, no matter. I've memorized your face, Miss Cameron." As she left the house in a panic skedaddle, I turned to Maverick. He was standing there with a blue face, as though my mere presence had sobered him up completely.
She and I never had anything to do with each...
I cut him off. "That doesn't freaking matter. Care to explain to me why your darling daughter Emery is looking so sickly and malnourished? Have you been properly feeding her?"
I don't let her eat anything at home as punishment for leaving some of her lunch at school uneaten. Then she'd be hungrier at lunchtime to the next day at school, right? It's part of my system of discipline.
Punishment? Discipline? You can't be serious, can you?
Yes, I'm dead serious. I mean, it's a waste of money, ain't it? She's not gonna eat anything, anyway.
Money? Are you trying to tell me that you have enough money to buy yourself loads and loads of alcohol, but not enough money to buy food for a hungry daughter?
Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? Hey, bitch? Meddling in my parenting methods, are we?
Maverick grabbed me by the collar and started to tighten it, and in the heat of the moment, with how pissed off I was that my body moved before I can control it. "You're the one who's the freaking bitch, Maverick Kingman." And as soon as I said that, I swatted his hand with ease with a quick and hard blow to the side with his elbow, stepped to the side and gave him a two-knuckle four-fist punch, which is among the most basic forms of punching in karate. Normally, I would have stopped my fist dead mere millimeters away from his jaw, but I let my fist hit him directly and fell to the floor out cold. And then I decided to leave him alone for the time being and do something about Emery, who seemed to be in a very serious condition. I called my parents, told them what had happened, and asked them to come over to help. They're literally a few minutes away driving, so although a part of me didn't want to bother them at such a late hour, I knew I would be so imposing too much. And then I called my in-laws and told them about what happened as well, and that's when another truth about Maverick was uncovered. Mr. Kingman told me the following.
Shortened hours? No, Gianna. He said he had to take care of Emery. So he asked for 5 days of paid leave to do just that. Why the devil would he lie to you about having shortened hours?
It turned out that Maverick claiming that he had shortened hours at work was a blatant lie, and instead took a long vacation and drunkenly, irresponsibly while I was away on a business trip, and with the woman he was cheating on me with, no less, without giving his hungry, weakened daughter the proper care she needed. This was a complete deal-breaker, but more on that later. For the time being, the most crucial task at hand was to take care of Emery. Soon, both sets of grandparents arrived, and although it was the middle of the night, after 1 a.m., the house was abuzz with activity. Mr. and Mrs. Kingman turned pale in shock at the sight of their drunken son unconscious on the floor, and their emaciated granddaughter on my lap on the living room couch. Mrs. Kingman, who had always had a dignified posture up until that point, simply collapsed in a heap of disappointed melancholy and said, "Oh my lord, I can't believe how skinny you are, sweetheart."
Grandpa, Grandma, I'm hungry,
Emery said with colorless lips. My own parents had bought some food, and I attempted feeding some egg salad sandwich to Emery, but the moment she took the second bite, she started to gag, and she vomited up the food along with some amount of bile. She rolled off my lap and onto the couch cushions, clutched her stomach, and started to groan and cry.
Mommy, it hurts. Ah!
Emery, what's wrong? Are you okay? Emery started sweating on her face, and her breathing became very labored, as though she was running at full speed with a towel in her mouth. We immediately called an ambulance in a panic, and never dared to leave her side until we got to the hospital and admitted her to a room. The diagnosis was that, because she had not eaten properly for several days, her body had not been able to keep up with the rapid calorie intake when I fed her the egg salad sandwiches, and her body went into a state of traumatic shock. She was given an intravenous at the hospital filled with nutrients for 24 hours, and once her condition had stabilized, she was put on a low-calorie, therapeutic diet for the following 3 days before gradually trying normal food. She sometimes regurgitated the food, but doctors assured me that it was all part of the process and that she was recovering. My paranoia during this time caused me to be a bit of a bother to the doctors, I'm sure, but seeing Emery getting more flushed with healthy color with every passing hour helped me recover from my panic frenzies. After 3 days, the doctor in charge of her told us that we should be able to bring her home in another 2 or 3 days. I was horrified when he told me that if we had delayed bringing her to the hospital just by a more few days, she would have been in a life-threatening condition. The following day, when my parents came to visit their granddaughter in the hospital, I asked them how things were with Kingsman were going. Since I knew Mom and Dad were in a constant communication with Mr. and Mrs. Kingman, they told me that for the rest of the night, Maverick was watched by his parents until he woke from his slumber. After he woke up, sober and with a bad hangover, Mr. and Mrs. Kingman took him home, where they had gotten a huge argument. Maverick claimed that he had been parented in a certain way, and that he had been using the same principles of discipline towards his own daughter. He also said that he was going to sue me for violence because of the fact I punched him. My in-laws were saddened that their son did not perceive the love that came with their way of parenting, and that he had only implemented the strictness without meaning to Emery. They were so disappointed that they did not seem to reflect very much of how they treated their granddaughter. As for my sanctioning him with quite literal iron fist, Mrs. Kingman told him, "You were just Gianna's punching bag last night, Maverick, and we have proof that you indicated force first, so she rightfully took necessary action in self-defense." Mr. Kingman nodded in agreement and added,
Considering what you did to Emery, I should ask her to make you her damn punching bag another 10,000 times. And by the way, the evidence that you initiated force first was from the security camera in the hallway.
After being told off by both of them, and after being shown the video footage of me grabbing my collar before I launched my counterattack, Maverick gave up his idea about suing me. Emery recovered well and was able to leave the hospital before the holidays in May. After leaving the hospital, she was to spend some time at my parents' house, which she herself said it was better than going home.
I don't want to stay at home because Daddy drinks. I want to stay at Grandma's house.
She had seen her father drinking when I wasn't around, and she didn't hated it. When her drunken father noticed her accusatory nature, he started yelling at her at home too, and further deprived her of the necessary nutrients to keep her healthy. I regretted that I could not perceive him becoming so addicted to alcohol before everything had tumbled into chaos. He had been cheating on me, and I was already determined to get a divorce, so I contacted my in-laws and asked them to meet with me to discuss it. And in the presence of both our parents and a lawyer, I saw Maverick for the first time in a while. He seemed calm, and he had been sober ever since the incident. It was there that we learned that another new fact about my husband. Someone in his workplace had snitched about the fact that he had been drinking on the job for some time. Because of this, per the request of my parents and my lawyer, he visited a hospital and was diagnosed as an alcoholic. Over the past few months, his drinking had decreased dramatically, and instead of drinking at home, he was drinking at work and outside to cope with his addiction. He also started buying expensive alcoholic beverages, and as a result with his spending spree, he had to dig into his accumulated savings, which later spiraled into more money spent on alcohol and his lover. Eventually, he became completely cash-strapped and even began lavishing money on his daughter's necessities. My in-laws literally got down on their knees and apologized to me and my parents, and apologized deeply, claiming that it was all their fault. My parents, along with myself, told them not to blame themselves for what their son had done. I suppose Maverick unfortunately misunderstood the intention of the strict discipline his parents had implemented on him. It was out of a strong parental love that they raised him as such, but he failed to recognize the compassion that came with the strictness. Perhaps my husband's head, which was already addicted to alcohol, could no longer comprehend such an even obvious thing. Maverick himself admitted to cheating on me and drinking, and he also said that he genuinely regretted doing these things, and apologized to me and Emery wholeheartedly.
While I was drinking, my anxiety was gone, and I felt relaxed. I felt in control. I knew everything was going to be alright with my life. But, looking back, I feel like I did really terrible things by not feeding my lovely daughter for days on end.
It's not something to be forgiven easily, Maverick. You know that? I hope. One wrong move and I could have lost my daughter.
I do know. Yes. You're right. I did terrible things. I'm really, really sorry. And I promise I'll do what I can to repay for my mistakes.
He had also enjoyed alcohol, but he started to distract himself from the stress of his job and the tenderness of affair by drinking more. And in the last year or so, although he felt bad about the situation, he had been unable to keep himself from drinking. Mr. Kingman said that he was planning to take a leave of absence and live in an addiction treatment facility until he was cured. The divorce was finalized, with Maverick admitting he was responsible for an affair. He agreed to pay me $50,000 in alimony and an additional $1,000 a month in child support for Emery until she turned 18. In return, I promised that visitation with Emery would only be allowed after he had enough received treatment for alcohol addiction to be deemed cleaned. Lastly, I told my ex-husband this: I want you to get over your addiction and become the father that Emery used to love again. Can you do that for her? Maverick Kingman nodded his head, sobbing tears of gratitude, hopefully. I was also moved. He genuinely loved his daughter and wanted to get her trust back. I hope he'll keep his promise. I then sent a letter to Cameron, the woman whom Maverick was having an affair with, demanding alimony. She worked for Mr. Kingman's company, and I had seen her face on the flyer and the company newsletter before. And when I checked with Mr. Kingman himself, who was the president, she had applied for the leave at the same time as his son. At first, she denied having an affair, but when I told her we were going to court if she wasn't reasonable, she got scared, and that her parents and siblings would be unable to live peacefully in this area if this went public. So she borrowed money and paid a lump sum of $20,000 in alimony. She then voluntarily resigned and quietly moved out of the region. Thus, the unfortunate divorce that affected our daughter was settled once and for all. During the holidays, we took her to the theme parks, where she ate a lot of delicious food, and her cheeks became plump again. Her arms and legs became as shapely as they once were, and her skin became radiant once again. When she started going back to school, her homeroom teacher told me that she had started eating all her school lunches and was even more active, and I was relieved that Emery was back to her old lovely self. She may have to deal with the loss of her father in many ways for some time in the future, but I am determined to accept her feelings and protect her so that this incident will not affect her life in any negative way.